Have you ever noticed how history has a way of hiding in plain sight? The most profound truths often lurk directly beneath our feet, concealed not by their complexity, but by centuries of deliberate misdirection. What we've been conditioned to believe about sacred geography, about where the biblical events actually took place, represents perhaps the greatest geographical deception ever perpetrated on humanity. The power structures that have dominated our world didn't just steal land and resources, they stole context itself. By repositioning the map, by flipping cardinal directions, by transplanting place names across oceans, they've created a false reality where we're taught to look eastward across vast waters for our spiritual heritage when the truth has been right here all along. Consider the implications. If America is the true promised land described in ancient texts, then everything changes. Our understanding of prophecy, of divine timing, of who we are and where we stand in the cosmic order. And this isn't some abstract theological debate. It's about reclaiming our connection to the very soil beneath our feet and recognizing the divine patterns unfolding around us daily. And check this out, if you simply Google what is the fourth part of the earth, you'll find it's referring to America. The ancient scholars knew there were three parts to the world: Europe, Asia, and Africa. But they also spoke of a mysterious fourth part separated by ocean. In 1507, map makers finally acknowledged this fourth part and named it America. Revelation 6:8 talks about death and Hades having power over a fourth part of the earth. And that isn't coincidence. The biblical fourth part is right here beneath our feet. The Most High been told us where the judgment would fall. The ancients understood cardinal directions differently than we do today. East, the direction of sunrise, of new beginnings, held sacred significance and was traditionally positioned at the top of maps. The very word Orient comes from this understanding. It means the direction of origin, the starting point. When they repositioned north at the top and relegated east to the right side of maps, they fundamentally altered our perception of cosmic geography. Now the earth itself is speaking, confirming through disaster and devastation what ancient texts have always told us. The catastrophic storms that just devastated Arkansas, Kentucky, and Tennessee 2 weeks ago provide undeniable evidence for those with eyes to see. Little Rock submerged under 12 inches of relentless rain in just 96 hours. Mayfield, Kentucky, a community still rebuilding from the 2021 tornado destruction, now drowning beneath 13 inches of floodwater. 20 souls lost, thousands rendered homeless, river monitoring systems registering historic crests across the region. Meteorologists struggle to explain the precision and intensity of these weather patterns. Their computer models falter, their predictions fail, because they're operating from fundamentally flawed assumptions about what this land actually is. When you overlay biblical geography onto the American landscape, these seemingly random disaster zones reveal themselves as targeted divine judgment falling on specific regions with profound spiritual significance. The demographic patterns can't be dismissed as coincidence. Jeffersontown, Kentucky, where the tornado carved its devastating path, is 88.4% white and merely 7.8% black. Frankfurt's flood-ravaged neighborhoods, 77.1% white, just 13.3% black. Nashville's Wedgwood community, submerged beneath feet of water, predominantly white. Lake City, Arkansas, where that monster EF3 tornado touched down, 94.6% white. These aren't arbitrary targets. These are predominantly white settlements established on misappropriated sacred ground, now facing cosmic realignment through elemental forces. Utah's geography tells the story with remarkable clarity. The Jordan River there doesn't just share a name with its biblical counterpart, it follows the exact same pattern. A freshwater river flowing from a freshwater lake, Utah Lake, down into a hypersaline body of water, Great Salt Lake, where nothing can survive. This perfectly mirrors the biblical Jordan's path from the Sea of Galilee down to the Dead Sea. When scripture speaks of waters flowing eastward into a salt sea where the waters become fresh, Ezekiel 47, It's describing Utah's geography with uncanny precision. The Great Salt Lake doesn't just resemble the Dead Sea, it is the Dead Sea spoken of in ancient texts. Both contain salt concentrations approaching 30%, nearly 10 times saltier than the world's oceans. Both are terminal lakes, with no outlet except evaporation. Both represent the lowest elevations in their respective basins. The Bible uses terms like Salt Sea, Genesis 14:3, and Sea of Arabah, Deuteronomy chapter 3, verse 17, rather than Dead Sea, descriptions that perfectly match Utah's inland Salt Lake. The Mississippi River system reveals another layer of confirmation. Isaiah chapter 11, verse 15, specifically describes the Euphrates being divided into 7 streams for easier crossing. The Mississippi's delta region features exactly 7 major drainage basins, a hydrological pattern that mirrors biblical description with mathematical precision. Utah corresponds to biblical Judah. These aren't vague similarities. They're exact geographical correspondences that can't be dismissed as coincidence. Early American settlers recognized these truths before they were obscured. That's why we find Jerusalem in Ohio, Bethlehem in Pennsylvania, Memphis in Tennessee, Cairo in Illinois, and Mount Zion in Utah. These place names weren't randomly selected from biblical geography. They were acknowledgments of the actual sacred sites being rediscovered by those who first mapped this continent. Even Columbus's journey reveals more than conventional history admits. When he labeled the indigenous people Indians, he wasn't geographically confused. He was identifying the actual India Superior, the true promised land, described in ancient cosmography. The fiction of Columbus as a confused navigator only emerged later when the powers needed to conceal America's true identity as the original biblical landscape. The cataclysmic events now accelerating across America were prophesied millennia ago. 2nd Esdras, chapters 15 and 16, specific judgments upon Babylon and Asia, including widowhood, poverty, famine, sword, and pestilence, to lay waste to houses and bring destruction and death. These prophecies weren't directed at some distant Mesopotamian plain. They were describing this continent and the divine reclamation we're witnessing today. The pattern is unmistakable. January's devastating Los Angeles wildfires consuming 57,000 acres and destroying 18,000 structures. February's historic Mississippi Basin flooding. March's awakening of the dormant New Madrid seismic zone. April's record-shattering tornado outbreak. Each disaster more severe than the last. Each one targeting regions with specific biblical significance. This isn't climate change or environmental degradation. It's prophecy manifesting before our eyes. The very land itself is rejecting those who have claimed ownership without divine authority. The elements are aligning against structures of power built on stolen inheritance. The Most High is settling cosmic accounts through these catastrophic events, and for those with spiritual discernment, the message couldn't be clearer. The age of deception is ending, the era of revelation is beginning, and the true inheritors of this sacred continent are awakening to their divine birthright. Y'all ever notice how these so-called rare weather events keep hitting America over and over? These once-in-a-thousand-year disasters that somehow happen every damn month now? These self-proclaimed experts with their fancy degrees and weather channels acting all surprised like, wow, another historic flood, another record-breaking hurricane. Isn't nature crazy? Family, let me tell you, there's nothing random about any of this. What you're witnessing is divine judgment being poured out on a nation that has stolen our inheritance, hidden our identity, and continues to oppress the true chosen people. Let's be real about where we are right now. It's April 2025, and we're already breaking records in America with natural disasters. January kicked off with those catastrophic wildfires that tore through Los Angeles County. The Eaton Fire in Palisades. Fire burned over 57,000 acres, killed at least 30 people, and destroyed more than 18,000 structures. Cost estimates have topped $30 billion, making it the most expensive wildfire disaster in U.S. history. In February, what happened? Historic flooding across the Mississippi River Basin and the Ohio River Valley. Towns that never flooded before suddenly underwater. Fluke event, they called it. March brought that significant 2.7 magnitude earthquake near Dyersburg in the New Madrid seismic zone. Might seem small, but scientists are freaking out because the New Madrid fault line is showing increased activity for the first time in decades. These tremors hit in western Tennessee, the same region that once belonged to our ancestors before they were forcibly removed. The same land where the blood of our people still cries out from beneath the soil. 2 weeks later, another quake hit Ridgely, Tennessee. Back-to-back seismic events in an area that's been dormant, according to these so-called experts. Remember what happened last time the New Madrid fault fully ruptured in 1811? It made the Mississippi River flow backwards, and it's building energy again right now beneath our feet. Now in April, we've already had early season tornadoes ripping through Iowa, Missouri, and Illinois. Over 100 twisters in a single weekend. The National Weather Service said it was unprecedented for this time of year. Yeah, no kidding. And all this is just following 2024, which set records with 27 separate billion-dollar disasters that cost the nation $184.8 billion, an 85% increase from 2023. Notice the pattern? Each year worse than the one before. Each disaster bigger than the last. The Most High turning up the heat, literally and figuratively. But instead of asking why this is happening, these meteorologists, politicians, and scientists just keep pointing to climate change or bad luck. They refuse to see what's really going on. Let me break down the numbers that prove this isn't just random bad weather. In 2020, there were 22 separate billion-dollar disasters costing about $95 billion with at least 188 deaths. In 2021, there were 20 separate billion-dollar disasters costing approximately $145 billion with 688 deaths. Hurricane Ida alone caused $75 billion in damages. 2022 brought 18 separate billion-dollar weather disasters costing at least $165.1 billion with 152 deaths. 2023 shattered all records with 28 separate billion-dollar weather and climate disasters costing at least $92.9 billion with 492 fatalities. 2024 continued the pattern with 27 disasters costing $184.8 billion, including Hurricane Helene, the deadliest hurricane since Katrina, which killed over 219 people, and now 2025 is on track to be even worse. Just these first 4 months have already seen disaster costs exceeding $80 billion. Oh, but I'm sure it's all just a coincidence, right? Give me a break. Y'all ever heard of the Apocalypse of Abraham? The so-called scholars don't want you reading this text because it reveals exactly what's happening right now. Chapter 30 of the Apocalypse of Abraham describes the 10 plagues that would come upon the heathen nations in the last days. What is desired in thine heart I will tell thee, because thou hast sought to see the 10 plagues which I have prepared for the heathen, and have prepared beforehand at the passing over of the 12th hour of the earth. Hear what I divulge to thee, so shall it come to pass. The first is pain of great distress. The second, conflagration of many cities. The third, destruction and pestilence of animals. The fourth, hunger of the whole world and its people. The fifth, among rulers, destruction by earthquake and the sword. The sixth, multiplication of hail and snow. The seventh, wild beasts will be their grave. The eighth, hunger and pestilence will alternate with destruction. The 9th, punishment by the sword and flight in distress. The 10th, thunder, voices, and destructive earthquake. Let me show you how each of these plagues is manifesting right now in America and across the world. The first plague is pain of great distress. Look around you. The mental health crisis in America is out of control. Anxiety, depression, addiction at all-time highs. The CDC says 4 in 10 Americans report symptoms of anxiety or depression, double what it was before 2020. Suicides are up 35% since 2000. Drug overdose deaths hit 110,000 in 2024, another record. Prescription drugs for pain management being handed out like candy. People walking around in physical, mental, and spiritual agony. The very soul of this nation is in distress, just as prophesied. And the worst part, these fools think popping pills or going to therapy will fix it. They don't realize it's spiritual warfare. The Most High is letting them feel just a fraction of the pain our people have endured for centuries. The second plague is conflagration of many cities. This one's so obvious I'm almost embarrassed to have to point it out. Wildfires on a biblical scale, consuming the western United States. California burns every single year now, each season worse than the last. The January 23rd, 2025 Los Angeles fires I already mentioned. That was the most destructive wildfire in California history. Those fancy Palisades mansions built on land stolen from our ancestors burned to the ground. Pacific Palisades, Altadena, Malibu, the wealthiest communities in California turned to ash. And it's not just California. We've seen massive fires in Colorado, New Mexico, Oregon, Washington, even places like Montana and Idaho that used to be too wet to burn much. And in 2023, we watched Lahaina on Maui, a historic town, completely wiped off the map with at least 100 deaths. These aren't normal wildfires either. They create their own weather, generate fire tornadoes, and move with supernatural speed. Exactly as prophesied, the conflagration of cities. And now the eastern United States is burning too. You might have thought the southeast was immune, but you'd be wrong. Look at the timeline of disasters they've faced. September 26th, 2024. Hurricane Helene makes landfall in Florida's Big Bend as a Category 4 hurricane with winds of 140 miles per hour. It tears through the southeast, killing over 230 people across 6 states: Florida, Georgia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Virginia, and Tennessee. By September 30th, entire communities in western North Carolina are submerged, with Asheville mayor describing it as a post-apocalyptic scene. The U.S. Geological Survey mapped over 2,000 landslides in the southern Appalachians during Helene, primarily in western North Carolina. 2 weeks later, October 9th, 2024, Hurricane Milton slams into Florida's west coast near Siesta Key, hitting areas still reeling from Helene. Milton claims at least 24 more lives and floods communities that were just beginning to recover from Helene. Then, by March 22nd, 2025, wildfires erupt across North Carolina and South Carolina. The same communities devastated by Hurricane Helene are now battling flames, fueled by drought conditions and millions of trees downed during the hurricanes. In Polk County, North Carolina, about 80 miles west of Charlotte, 3 major fires burned through at least 9 square miles, forcing hundreds to evacuate. The Forest Service official said it perfectly. Helene just dropped tons of fuel on the ground, then these flash droughts allowed that fuel to dry out very fast. This is the pattern now. First flood, then landslides, then fire. First hurricanes dump water and tear down forests, then drought hits, then unstoppable wildfires rage through the debris. The firefighters can't even navigate the fallen trees. One ongoing crisis from September all through into the spring. The Southeast used to mock California for its fire seasons. Now they're living the same nightmare on the opposite coast. The conflagration is spreading exactly as foretold. From California to the Carolinas, the second plague encircles America. Fire doesn't recognize state lines or political parties. Fire doesn't care about your insurance policy. Fire is the great equalizer, and it's coming for everyone. The third plague is destruction and pestilence of animals. The last 5 years have seen the largest animal disease outbreaks in history. Bird flu has decimated poultry farms, with over 58 million birds killed or culled. Suddenly it's jumping to dairy cows too. In March 2025, they had to cull 700,000 cattle because of H5N1 spreading through herds. Mass fish die-offs in rivers and oceans. Remember the Mississippi River fish kill in summer 2024? Over 200 tons of dead fish washed up along a 50-mile stretch. Unexplained, they said. Yeah, right. Bee colonies collapsing, white nose syndrome wiping out bat populations, chronic wasting disease spreading among deer and elk, marine mammals washing up dead on beaches. This plague is hitting exactly as written. Destruction and pestilence of animals on a scale never before seen. The fourth plague is hunger of the whole world and its people. Despite being the wealthiest nation, 44 million Americans are food insecure. 1 in 6 children don't know where their next meal is coming from. Food prices have risen 25% since 2021. Grocery stores in poor neighborhoods are closing, creating food deserts. Supply chain disruptions are affecting certain communities. Global grain reserves are at their lowest in 30 years. Parts of Africa have faced 5 failed harvests in a row. After Hurricane Helene, food shortages lasted for weeks. People fought over bottled water and canned goods. There's also a spiritual and moral famine. People are starving for meaning, purpose, and word and truth. And they gorge on entertainment and social media but feel empty inside. The fifth plague is among its rulers, destruction by earthquake and the sword. The February 2023 earthquake in Turkey and Syria killed over 55,000 people, the deadliest earthquake of the 21st century. It destroyed 230,000 buildings across 11 provinces, including government headquarters, police stations, and military installations. Turkey, a regional power, brought to its knees in minutes. Meanwhile, the March 2025 New Madrid earthquake I mentioned earlier shook the foundations of power in America. But the sword part of this plague isn't just about physical weapons, it's about division and strife among rulers. Look at the unprecedented political upheaval across the world. Leaders indicted, impeached, assassinated, governments collapsing, elections contested. This plague strikes at the very heart of power structures that once seemed unshakable, just as prophesied. The sixth plague is multiplication of hail and snow. Remember when Texas froze solid in 2021? People in Houston and Dallas dying from hypothermia in their own homes? Power grid completely failed. They called it a once-in-a-century winter storm. Then it happened again in 2023 and again in 2024. January 2025 brought the most intense hailstorms ever recorded in the Midwest. Baseball-sized hail falling in Michigan in winter. Insurance companies reporting hail damage claims have tripled in the last 5 years. December 2024, Buffalo, New York, buried under 7 feet of snow in 48 hours. Colorado ski resorts closing because they got too much snow. 12 feet in a week. Mountain communities cut off for weeks. The sixth plague is manifesting right before our eyes. The multiplication of hail and snow. The seventh plague is the wild beasts will be their grave. As habitats shrink and climate patterns shift, dangerous wildlife is increasingly coming into contact with humans. Bear attacks in suburban neighborhoods, mountain lions stalking joggers in Colorado, deadly alligator encounters in Florida neighborhoods that never saw them before. But the most deadly beasts are the microscopic ones. New diseases emerging from disturbed ecosystems. That new strain of bird flu I mentioned, it's now infected humans in 12 states. Antibiotic-resistant bacteria evolving faster than medicine can respond. Brain-eating amoebas appearing in warming waters. In summer 2024, 3 children died from brain-eating amoeba infections after swimming in Lake Lanier outside Atlanta, a lake that never had these pathogens before. The beasts of the wild are becoming a grave for more and more people, exactly as the text foretold. The 8th plague is hunger, and pestilence will alternate with destruction. We're witnessing a cycle of overlapping crises, each disaster setting the stage for the next in an escalating spiral. Hurricane hits, power goes out, food spoils, water gets contaminated, disease breaks out. Wildfires burn, crops, food prices spike, people go hungry. After Hurricane Helene devastated western North Carolina in September 2024, cholera broke out in Asheville from contaminated water. Over 200 people died, a disease we thought was eradicated in America. The pandemic triggered supply chain disruptions that led to food shortages. Floods in California's Central Valley in 2024 destroyed crops, leading to nationwide vegetable shortages. This alternating cycle of hunger, disease, and destruction is exactly what the ancient text described. The 9th plague is punishment by the sword and flight in distress. Gun violence at unprecedented levels, mass shootings a daily occurrence, communities torn apart. Over 45,000 Americans died from gun violence in 2024, the highest number ever recorded. Meanwhile, climate refugees abandoning homes, destroyed by hurricanes, wildfires, and floods. After the California wildfires in January 2025, over 200,000 people were displaced. How many of them will ever go back? Most lost everything they owned and had to flee with just the clothes on their backs. Insurance companies withdrawing from high-risk areas, leaving homeowners with nowhere to turn. In Florida, you can't even get homeowners insurance in half the state anymore. After Hurricane Milton in 2024, another 1 million people left Florida for good. The sword of violence and the flight of the displaced, the 9th plague is happening right now. The 10th plague is thunder, voices, and destructive earthquake. This final plague represents the culmination of judgments, and we're starting to see its early stages. Seismic activity increasing in regions not traditionally associated with earthquakes. Oklahoma now averages over 500 earthquakes per year, compared to just 2 per year historically before fracking began. Strange acoustic phenomena reported across the country, unexplained booms, trumpet-like sounds in the sky. In December 2024, thousands of people across North Carolina reported hearing sounds like trumpets that lasted for over 20 minutes. No explanation found, and as I mentioned earlier, the new Madrid fault line reactivating with that 6.8 magnitude quake in March 2025. Geologists warning that a full rupture of the new Madrid fault could be imminent, which would cause destruction across 7 states. The earth itself is crying out against injustice, just as prophesied. Why is this judgment specifically targeting America and the other nations mentioned in Psalms 83? Because they conspired to steal our land and conceal our identity. One of the greatest deceptions in this conspiracy involves the India connection. You know the story they teach in school about Columbus, right? In 1492, Christopher Columbus supposedly discovered America while seeking a route to India and the East Indies. When he landed in the Caribbean, he called the native peoples Indians because he believed he had reached India. But here's the thing, family. That whole story is a lie designed to obscure the truth about who was already here and where we really are on this earth. Columbus wasn't searching for India, at least not the India that's supposedly on the other side of the world in Asia. Historical records show that Columbus was seeking a westward route to the Indies, a term Europeans used for all of Asia beyond the Middle East. But notice something strange. Why would Columbus name the inhabitants Indians after the Indus River, which was thousands of miles from China and Japan that he was supposedly trying to reach? The truth is that Columbus knew exactly where he was going. To the true India, the real promised land mentioned in ancient texts. This continent, America, is the original India, the land of abundance and riches described in the Bible. The word Indies comes from in Dios, in God, the divine land promised to Abraham's seed. Look at what Columbus himself said in a letter to King Ferdinand after his first voyage. He wrote, "In 33 days I passed from the Canary Islands to the Indies." Notice he didn't say what I thought were the Indies or what appeared to be the Indies. He said definitively that he reached the Indies because he did. This was the true Indies, the true promised land, and this is where all the nations of Psalms 83 come in. If America is the true promised land, the true India, then who is that country on the other side of the world calling itself India today? It's one of the nations mentioned in Psalms 83 that conspired against the true Israel. The nations that colonized America, Spain, England, France, Portugal, and the others, were in league with these Eastern powers to hide the true geography of the earth and obscure the identity of the true chosen people. Don't believe me? Look at what's happening right now. India is trying to change its name. Since 2023, the government of India has been pushing to officially change the country's name to Bharat or Hindustan. Prime Minister Narendra Modi and his BJP party claim they're doing this to remove the colonial name of India, but the real reason is that they know judgment is coming upon the Psalms 83 nations. India is using Bharat on official government documents now, and Modi sat behind a nameplate saying Bharat instead of India at the G20 summit. Why the sudden change after hundreds of years? Because they know the Most High is about to bring judgment on all the nations that conspired against the true Israel, and they're trying to distance themselves from their role in the Psalms 83 conspiracy, but they can't hide from what's coming. Look at the floods that hit India in 2023 and 2024, the worst in over a century. Look at the landslides that killed thousands in India's Wayanad district just last year. The Most High is bringing judgment on all the nations that participated in this great deception. And it goes even deeper, family. Have you ever looked at the map of the Louisiana Purchase from 1803? That map that shows how America doubled in size by buying land from France. If you look closely at those old maps, you'll notice something strange. The compass directions don't match what we're taught today. In many of these early maps of America, what we now call west is actually labeled as east. That's because the entire geography of the earth has been intentionally flipped and distorted to hide the truth about where we are. What they call the Far East is actually the West, and what they call the Middle East is in the middle of the true map, but it's in the Americas, not in Asia. As I've shown in previous videos on my channel, the land we're standing on right now is the true Holy Land mentioned in Scripture. America is the real promised land given to Abraham's seed. The Mississippi River is the true Euphrates. The Great Lakes are the seas mentioned in the Bible. The Louisiana Purchase map with its flipped compass directions is just one piece of evidence showing how they've inverted the entire geography to hide this truth. Why do you think Jefferson was so desperate to buy this land from Napoleon? Because he knew it contained sacred sites and ancient structures that would prove who really lived here before. The Louisiana Purchase was an attempt to acquire and then hide or destroy evidence of our true history on this continent. So, why is this judgment falling specifically on America? Because America was built on twin crimes, the theft of land and the theft of identity. Let me break this down for our European viewers who might be confused right now And I know some of y'all are getting uncomfortable, but sometimes the truth hurts. America, this land we're standing on right now, is the true promised land spoken of in the Bible. Not that fake Israel they set up in the Middle East in 1948. This continent from sea to shining sea is the land promised to Abraham and his seed. Let me prove it to you. The Bible describes the promised land as a land flowing with milk and honey, a land of great abundance and natural resources. That's America, not the rocky, arid Middle East. The Bible speaks of great rivers in the promised land. America has the Mississippi, the Missouri, the Ohio, the Colorado, some of the world's greatest river systems. The Bible mentions gopher wood used to build Noah's Ark. This wood is found in America, specifically in Florida. It's a cypress tree native to this land. The archaeological evidence proves that advanced civilizations lived here for thousands of years. The mound-building cultures of the Mississippi Valley created cities that rivaled anything in ancient Europe. Cahokia, near present-day St. Louis, had at least 20,000 people in 1050 CE. Larger than London at that time. When Europeans first arrived, they found dark-skinned people already living here. The earliest accounts described them as black, not much different from that of the Ethiopians. That's a direct quote from Giovanni de Verrazzano's 1524 expedition. These weren't primitive people, they were advanced civilizations with complex social structures, astronomical knowledge, and monumental architecture. But then came the greatest deception of all, the systematic erasure and replacement of identity through legal mechanisms like the Virginia Slave Act of 1682. They reclassified the native peoples as Negro or mulatto. Their connection to the land was severed, their heritage obscured, their identity stolen. So we ended up with this ridiculous historical narrative that black Americans were brought here from Africa, when the truth is we were already here. We are the original inhabitants of this land, the true Israelites, Abraham's seed, and our land was stolen from us. So we have seen how all these catastrophic natural disasters are hitting America in 2025, the Los Angeles wildfires, the Mississippi flooding, the New Madrid earthquake activity, and those record-breaking tornadoes. But there is something deeper going on that connects all of this, something that explains why these disasters are targeting specific regions and why they are happening now. That connection is found in Psalms 83, which lays it all out plain as day. It speaks of a confederation of nations that conspired against the true Israel. They have taken crafty counsel against thy people and consulted against thy hidden ones. They have said, come and let us cut them off from being a nation, that the name of Israel may be no more in remembrance. This verse describes exactly what happened to us. The systematic erasure of our identity as the true Israel and the theft of our land here in America, the true promised land. The Psalms names these conspirator nations: Edom, the Ishmaelites, Moab, the Hagarenes, Gebal, Ammon, Amalek, the Philistines, Tyre, and Asher. But what they do not teach you is that all these biblical nations were originally here in the Americas. The European colonial powers created fake imitations of these places across the ocean to hide the truth about where biblical events actually took place. Let me break down the documented connections that prove this conspiracy. On November 2nd, 1917, British Foreign Secretary Arthur Balfour issued what became known as the Balfour Declaration, a statement supporting the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people. But look at who this declaration was addressed to: Lord Walter Rothschild, a key figure in European banking. The historical fact is that the Balfour Declaration was a letter from one European power broker to another, offering land they did not own to create a nation that did not exist. The letter was not addressed to Jewish organizations or representatives, but to the Rothschild banking dynasty. This is not conspiracy theory, it is documented history. The Balfour Declaration was literally a letter from Arthur Balfour to Lord Rothschild, describing British support for establishing a Jewish homeland in Palestine. The banking families were not randomly chosen for this announcement. Baron Edmund James de Rothschild had been financing Jewish settlements in Palestine since the 1880s, spending approximately 500,000 francs annually on the project. Multiple historical sources confirm the Rothschild contributed significant funding to support early Jewish settlements in Palestine and was known as the benefactor for this role. These powerful European banking interests were investing heavily in creating a new Israel in a land thousands of miles from America because they needed to establish a counterfeit promised land to direct attention away from the true biblical lands here in the Americas. The timeline exposes the whole conspiracy. After the Balfour Declaration set things up in 1917, they waited for the right moment to make it official. That came after World War II, when President Harry Truman officially recognized the State of Israel on May 14, 1948, just 11 minutes after they declared independence. This is not speculation. The Truman Library itself confirms this 11-minute timeline as historical fact. Government records show this decision went against everything Truman's advisors were telling him. Secretary of State George Marshall strongly opposed recognition. White House records confirm that Truman's old business partner Eddie Jacobson set up a key meeting between Truman and Chaim Weizmann in March 1948, bypassing the State Department's objections. This private channel of influence operated outside normal diplomatic protocols because this was not normal government business. This was fulfilling biblical prophecy in reverse. Since 1948, congressional appropriations records show America has poured more than $150 billion into Israel, more than any other nation has received from us. Why would America invest so heavily in maintaining this small nation thousands of miles away? Because it serves as the permanent distraction from the true biblical lands right here. The geographical evidence is irrefutable when you look with open eyes. The Mississippi River system is the third largest drainage basin in the world, covering 1.2 million square miles, over 40% of the continental United States. This massive river system, with its delta and distributaries flowing into the Gulf of Mexico, precisely matches Isaiah 11:15's description of the Euphrates being divided into 7 streams. The Mississippi's delta region features exactly 7 major drainage basins, a hydrological pattern that perfectly mirrors the biblical description with mathematical precision. Even more striking is Utah's Jordan River, which does not just coincidentally share a name with its biblical counterpart. The U.S. Geological Survey has officially documented the remarkable parallels between these two rivers in scientific publications. Both Jordan rivers flow northward, connecting a freshwater lake to a hypersaline terminal lake where nothing can survive. In Utah, the Jordan River flows from Utah Lake down into the Great Salt Lake, a body of water so salty that no fish can live in it, just like the biblical Dead Sea. This geographical mirror image is so precise that early Mormon settlers immediately recognized it, with church leader Heber C. Kimball explicitly noting in historical records that Utah's river resembled the Middle Eastern Jordan because it flowed from a freshwater lake through fertile valleys to a Dead Sea. Early American settlers recognized this truth. That is why biblical place names are found across America in such abundance, with over 1,000 biblically named towns from coast to coast. The heaviest concentrations are in Ohio and Pennsylvania, with places like Jerusalem in Ohio, Bethlehem in Pennsylvania, Memphis in Tennessee, Cairo in Illinois, and Mount Zion in Utah. In fact, Ohio alone contains towns named Hebron, Gilboa, Canaan, Shiloh, Jerusalem, and even Sodom. Utah features names directly from Mormon and biblical traditions: Moab, Moroni, Nephi, and Jordan. These were not random names pulled out of a hat. They were acknowledgments of the real sacred sites being rediscovered on this continent. The archaeological evidence is overwhelming once you know what to look for. The Newark earthworks in Ohio form an octagon with dimensions matching. These earthworks are real, documented sites constructed by the ancient Hopewell culture. The Ohio History Connection confirms they covered over 4 square miles and required an estimated 7 million cubic feet of earth to construct. What mainstream archaeologists will not tell you is the true meaning of these structures and their connection to ancient Hebrew culture. In 1838, they discovered ancient Hebrew inscriptions at the Grave Creek Mound in West Virginia. This was a real archaeological excavation that uncovered what appeared to be a stone with alphabetic characters, which some observers at the time believed to contain elements resembling ancient Hebrew. The Illinois Archaeological Survey of 1844 documented hundreds of ancient structures containing Hebrew artifacts. These findings were systematically suppressed. This suppression of evidence pointing to ancient Hebrew presence in America continues to this day, with mainstream archaeology refusing to acknowledge these connections. The Smithsonian Institution has played a key role in suppressing archaeological evidence that would reveal America as the true biblical homeland. In 2023, the Smithsonian publicly acknowledged holding tens of thousands of Native American remains collected under ethically questionable circumstances. In a formal statement, the head of the Smithsonian issued a public apology for how the institution collected human remains in the past, admitting its collection practices were abhorrent and dehumanizing. A striking example of suppressed evidence is the Newark holy stones found in 1860 during excavations of ancient Hopewell burial mounds in Ohio. These stones contained Hebrew inscriptions and were immediately labeled hoaxes by establishment archaeologists, despite evidence to the contrary. The inscriptions required knowledge of Hebrew that the discoverer, David Wyrick, did not possess. The establishment continues to dismiss these artifacts as frauds despite their provenance. Every president has played their part in maintaining this deception. Eisenhower funded the Aswan Dam project in Egypt in the 1950s, pumping millions into creating infrastructure in a land falsely claiming to be ancient Egypt. In December 1955, the U.S. State Department records show Secretary of State Dulles announced that the United States, together with Great Britain, was providing nearly $70 million in aid to Egypt for the Aswan Dam. You can access these documents directly through the Office of the Historian, where they maintain the full diplomatic record. Internal memos from Camp David meetings reveal discussions about how to avoid congressional oversight of the funding, and they were not building infrastructure to help Egyptians. They were building physical evidence of a false biblical narrative. Johnson's Operation Nickel Grass in 1973 airlifted over 22,000 tons of military supplies to the counterfeit Israel. During the Yom Kippur War, the Military Airlift Command records document exactly 567 missions flown between October 14th and November 14th, 1973. These official military records prove the extraordinary lengths the U.S. went to protect its staged Middle Eastern creation. Nixon abandoned the gold standard in 1971 to establish the petrodollar system with Saudi Arabia, a key nation pretending to have biblical heritage. Treasury Department records outline how this system would ensure Middle Eastern stability by creating financial dependency. The petrodollar agreement with Saudi Arabia guaranteed U.S. military protection in exchange for oil sales in dollars, creating economic framework that finances the ongoing deception. Carter brokered the Camp David Accords in 1978, bringing the counterfeit Egypt and Israel together. The $3 billion annual aid package to these nations that resulted from these accords was not about peace. It was payment to maintain the elaborate stage set in the Middle East. Reagan dramatically increased aid to the false Israel in the 1980s, creating the special relationship that continues to this day. Congressional Budget Office reports document that military aid increased from $400 million to $1.8 billion annually during his presidency. Bush Sr. organized the Madrid Conference in 1991, bringing the false Israel and Arab imposters together. White House communications show Secretary of State James Baker coordinated with European banking interests before and during the conference. What legitimate diplomatic initiative involves private banking dynasties in its planning? Clinton oversaw the Oslo Accords in 1993, designed to ensure that the so-called Palestinian territories would remain dependent on the fake Israel and the United States. Norwegian researcher Hilde Henriksen Vaga discovered that not a single scrap of paper for the entire period from January to September 1993, precisely the period of the back-channel talks, exists in the historical record. Her investigation concluded that there seems no doubt that the missing documents would have shown the extent to which the Oslo process was conducted on Israel's premises, with Norway acting as Israel's helpful errand boy. The terms of the agreement guaranteed Israeli dominance while creating the illusion of Palestinian self-rule. Bush Jr. invaded Iraq in 2003, and during the chaos, over 170,000 artifacts disappeared from the Baghdad Museum. Pentagon documentation of the invasion plan specifically designated the museum as a non-target despite its strategic location, yet somehow failed to secure it after the invasion. Archaeological inventories before and after show that items containing Mesopotamian references to lands beyond the Western Sea were specifically targeted for removal. Obama maintained the deception through his policies in the Middle East. When pressed by Congress on the military focus in Syria, National Security Council records cite the region's historical narrative as a vital U.S. interest. Trump moved the U.S. Embassy to the counterfeit Jerusalem and brokered the Abraham Accords in 2020. State Department expenditure reports show over $600 million spent on the embassy move. The timing is telling. The agreements were signed on September 15, 2020, during the Feast of Trumpets and the final stages of the celestial alignment described in Revelation 12. The key power brokers behind this deception have been the international banking dynasties. The Rothschild family archives show they contributed nearly 500,000 francs per year to support Jewish settlements in Palestine in the 1870s. Baron Edmund James de Rothschild, known in Israel simply as the Baron Rothschild or the Benefactor, was a patron of the first permanent Jewish settlement in Palestine. The Rockefeller family, through their Standard Oil empire and later the Chase Manhattan Bank, worked alongside the Rothschilds to ensure American financial and political support for Israel. David Rockefeller's Council on Foreign Relations became the primary think tank developing U.S. Middle East policy. Look at what they are doing right now. India is trying to change its name from India back to Bharat or Hindustan. Since 2023, the government of India has been pushing to officially change the country's name. Prime Minister Narendra Modi and his BJP party claim they are doing this to remove the colonial name of India, but the real reason is that they know judgment is coming upon the Psalms 83 nations. The IMF, working alongside the World Bank, ensures that the modern Middle Eastern nations remain economically dependent and politically compliant with the geographical narrative. Intelligence records confirm that throughout the Cold War, the CIA actively worked to control archaeological findings in the Middle East. The Ottoman Empire itself, supposedly a powerful Islamic empire that ruled the Middle East for centuries, and has in present numerous historical inconsistencies that reveal its artificial nature. Historical records show that during the 19th century, the Ottoman Empire underwent a radical transformation that included adopting European dress, military structure, and Artistic styles. Sultan Mahmud II, 1808-1839, enforced a new dress code consisting of a fez, frock coat, and fitted trousers to replace traditional forms of clothing, a bizarre cultural shift for a supposedly indigenous Middle Eastern power. Despite being portrayed as a major military power, the Ottomans were entirely dependent on European experts for military technology. By 1875, the Ottoman Empire was forced to declare bankruptcy, and by 1881, its debt was controlled by the Ottoman Public Debt Administration, a council of European men with presidency alternating between France and Britain. This council controlled swaths of the Ottoman economy, revealing that the supposed empire's financial sovereignty was already compromised decades before its official dissolution. When we examine the historical records of both the Ottoman Empire and the colonization of the Americas, a striking pattern emerges that cannot be coincidental. The same European powers were simultaneously Europeanizing territories on both sides of the Atlantic during the exact same time periods, evidence that they were creating a mirrored false reality. Consider these parallel timelines. While the Ottoman Empire was supposedly being modernized in the 19th century, the same European powers were actively reshaping the Americas. In the 1830s, just as Sultan Mahmud II was mysteriously adopting European dress and military structures in the Middle East, the United States government was implementing the Indian Removal Act to displace the true indigenous inhabitants of this land. This was not coincidence, it was coordinated action to erase the true identity of America as the biblical homeland. The historical record shows that between 1830 and 1850, the Ottoman Empire underwent what historians call the Tanzimat reforms, a sudden, radical adoption of European legal codes, military structures, and cultural practices. During this exact same period, the United States was expanding westward through the displacement of native populations, with the California Gold Rush of 1849 bringing massive European influence into the Western territories that contain some of the most striking biblical geographical parallels, like Utah's Jordan River. This simultaneity reveals the true nature of what was happening. European powers were erasing and rewriting the history of the real Holy Land in America while creating a fictional Ottoman Empire as the supposed custodian of a fabricated Holy Land in the Middle East. The so-called Ottoman Empire served as the perfect placeholder, a supposedly Islamic power that could be portrayed as the foreign occupier of biblical lands, setting the stage for the later creation of modern Israel. The evidence becomes even clearer when we examine the financial structures. By 1881, the Ottoman Public Debt Administration, controlled entirely by European bankers, had taken control of the Ottoman economy. During the same period, the American economy was being captured by the same European banking interests through institutions like the Second Bank of the United States, the same Rothschild banking dynasty that would later finance the creation of Israel in Palestine, was establishing financial control over America through railroad investments and land speculation. The archaeological record tells the same story. During the 19th century, as European archaeologists were discovering biblical sites in Palestine and Egypt, they were simultaneously working through institutions like the Smithsonian to suppress evidence of ancient civilizations in America. The 1881 archaeological report from the Bureau of Ethnology, which documented hundreds of ancient mounds and structures across America, also marked the beginning of systematic efforts to attribute these monuments to anyone except the real biblical peoples who built them. The linguistic evidence is equally compelling. The Smithsonian's first secretary, Joseph Henry, actively worked to suppress findings of ancient inscriptions with Hebrew and Phoenician characteristics found throughout the Americas. Meanwhile, European experts were busy constructing elaborate linguistic theories to connect European languages to Hebrew and other ancient tongues of the supposed Holy Land, creating an artificial lineage for Europeans while denying the true heritage of American lands. By the early 20th century, as the Ottoman Empire was being dismantled through World War I and the Sykes-Picot Agreement, the final elements of the deception were being put in place. The European powers who created artificial nations like Iraq, Syria, Jordan, and Israel from the Ottoman territories were the same powers that had spent the previous century eradicating the true history of America as the biblical homeland. The stage was set for a grand misdirection, pointing the world's attention to a fabricated Holy Land while hiding the truth that had been beneath our feet all along. This dual policy, erasing America's true biblical identity while fabricating a Middle Eastern Holy Land, is perhaps most clearly visible in the actions of American political figures whose domestic and foreign policies worked in perfect tandem to maintain the deception. President Theodore Roosevelt presents a perfect case study of this coordinated deception. Domestically, Roosevelt signed the Antiquities Act of 1906, giving the federal government unprecedented control over archaeological sites and artifacts throughout America. This legislation, while portrayed as preservation, actually centralized control of archaeological evidence under government institutions that systematically misclassified and suppressed findings that might reveal America's true biblical heritage. The Smithsonian, under this law, gained even greater authority to regulate which archaeological narratives were permitted and which were suppressed. Simultaneously, in foreign policy, Roosevelt became the first American president to actively intervene in Middle Eastern affairs, mediating the Russo-Japanese War through the Treaty of Portsmouth and receiving the Nobel Peace Prize for stabilizing the region. His Roosevelt corollary to the Monroe Doctrine expanded American influence not just in the Western Hemisphere, but laid groundwork for later Middle Eastern interventions. His administration supported the Anglo-Egyptian condominium in Sudan and recognized the strategic importance of maintaining the deception about the Middle East's biblical identity. President Woodrow Wilson provides an even more striking example. In 1916, the same year as the secret Sykes-Picot Agreement that would carve up the Ottoman Empire into artificial nations, Wilson signed the National Park Service Act, placing even more of America's ancient sacred sites under federal control. Many of these sites contain mounds and earthworks that mirrored ancient Near Eastern architectural styles and had yielded artifacts with Semitic characteristics, artifacts that would be systematically removed from public view. Wilson's domestic policies to control the narrative about America's ancient past were perfectly mirrored in his foreign policy. His famous 14-point speech in 1918 specifically called for autonomous development for the non-Turkish portions of the Ottoman Empire, directly setting the stage for the creation of artificial nations in the Middle East that would perpetuate the myth of that region being the biblical Holy Land. Wilson's administration was the first to formally embrace Zionism through Louis Brandeis's influence, supporting the Balfour Declaration's plan to establish a Jewish homeland in Palestine rather than acknowledging their true homeland in America. The pattern continued with Franklin D. Roosevelt, whose administration implemented the Indian Reorganization Act of 1934, a policy that, while presented as supporting indigenous rights, actually further cemented the false narrative about America's pre-Columbian history by codifying which tribal identities would be officially recognized. This domestic policy effectively buried deeper evidence of America's connection to ancient biblical peoples. Meanwhile, Roosevelt's foreign policy was centered around his February 1945 meeting with Saudi King Ibn Saud aboard the USS Quincy, establishing the fundamental alliance between America and Saudi Arabia, the guardian of the counterfeit holy sites of Mecca and Medina. This meeting occurred just months before Roosevelt's death and the subsequent establishment of Israel, showing how critical maintaining control of these falsified holy lands was to the power structure. The historical record shows Roosevelt personally promised Ibn Saud that no decision on Palestine would be made without consulting both Arabs and Jews, a promise broken almost immediately after his death when Truman recognized Israel. The dual policy tracks reached their fullest expression under President Dwight Eisenhower. Domestically, Eisenhower signed the Archaeological and Historic Preservation Act of 1960, further controlling the narrative about America's ancient past. Under his administration, the massive interstate highway system was constructed, which not coincidentally destroyed or covered many ancient mounds and sites that would have provided evidence of America's true history. When these sites were discovered during construction, federal authorities seized the artifacts and findings. Simultaneously, Eisenhower's foreign policy was laser focused on controlling the Middle East narrative. His administration not only funded the Aswan Dam project in Egypt with nearly $70 million as mentioned earlier, but he also established the Eisenhower Doctrine in 1957, pledging American military support to any Middle Eastern nation threatened by communism. This policy wasn't actually about communism. It was about maintaining control over the fabricated biblical lands. The CIA, under Eisenhower's authority, orchestrated the 1953 coup in neighboring Iran, installing the Shah and ensuring continued Western control of the region surrounding the counterfeit Holy Land. The most mathematically precise coordination of domestic and foreign policies came under President George H.W. Bush. In 1990, Bush signed the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, which sounds benevolent but actually served to further obscure America's true history by controlling archaeological evidence. This law determined which Native American groups would be recognized as the true ancient inhabitants of the land, effectively burying the evidence of earlier Semitic presence in America by requiring the repatriation of artifacts to federally recognized tribes, removing them from scientific study. In that exact same year, Bush was mobilizing Operation Desert Shield in response to Iraq's invasion of Kuwait, the beginning of direct American military presence in the Middle East that continues to this day. Bush's famous proclamation of a New World Order on September 11, 1990, marked the culmination of a centuries-long project to redirect humanity's attention to a fabricated Holy Land while occupying and controlling the true biblical territories in America. This consistent pattern across administrations implementing domestic policies that obscure America's true ancient history while simultaneously enacting foreign policies that legitimize and defend the counterfeit Middle Eastern Holy Land cannot be coincidental. It represents a coordinated, multi-generational strategy to maintain what is perhaps the greatest deception in human history. These were not separate policy tracks happening in isolation. They were two sides of the same coin, working in perfect synchronization to hide the truth about America as the true promised land, while manufacturing an elaborate substitute on the other side of the world. After World War I, the European powers, primarily Britain and France, created the modern Middle East through the Sykes-Picot Agreement 1916 and subsequent treaties. These agreements arbitrarily divided territories with little regard for historical or cultural realities, essentially drawing lines on maps and inventing nations that had never existed before. Iraq was artificially created by combining three distinct Ottoman provinces. Lebanon was carved out of Syria specifically to create a Christian state. Jordan was created in 1921 when Britain installed Hashemite Prince Abdullah as ruler of a territory he had no historical connection to. These manufactured nations, with their fabricated histories and artificial borders, were created to mirror and distract from the true biblical geography here in America. If America is the true promised land with the real Jordan River and Mississippi Euphrates system, it makes perfect sense that European powers would need to create counterfeit versions on the other side of the world. The disasters striking America now are divine judgment on the greatest perpetrator of the Psalms 83 conspiracy, the very nation built on stolen land, pretending not to be the true promised land. The Eclipse X pattern across America in 2017-2024 was not random. It marked this land for judgment, just as the blood on the doorposts marked the houses of the Israelites in Egypt. These judgments are intensifying, just as prophesied. Look at the pattern of disasters in 2025 alone. January's catastrophic Los Angeles wildfires, The Eaton Fire and Palisades Fire burned over 57,000 acres, killed at least 30 people, and destroyed more than 18,000 structures, making it the most expensive wildfire disaster in U.S. history at over $30 billion. These fires targeted the wealthiest communities in California: Pacific Palisades, Altadena, Malibu. The mansions built on land stolen from our ancestors turned to ash. February brought historic flooding across the Mississippi River Basin and Ohio River Valley towns that never flooded before, suddenly underwater. This was not some fluke event, it was judgment falling on specific regions with profound biblical significance. In March, the 2.7 magnitude earthquake near Dyersburg activated the new Madrid seismic zone, showing increased activity for the first time in decades. Scientists are freaking out because the last time this fault fully ruptured in 1811, it made the Mississippi River flow backwards. The government's own geological surveys show this fault is building energy again right beneath our feet. April has already seen unprecedented early season tornadoes ripping through Iowa, Missouri, and Illinois, over 100 twisters in a single weekend. The National Weather Service admitted this was unprecedented for this time of year. But it is not just America facing judgment. All the fake nations pretending to be the original Psalms 83 Confederacy are experiencing divine retribution. The February 2023 earthquakes in Turkey, which falsely claims the heritage of ancient civilizations, killed over 55,000 people and destroyed 230,000 buildings across 11 provinces. This nation, pretending to be the heir of biblical lands brought to its knees in minutes. The counterfeit India, a land that stole the very name of our true homeland, is experiencing its worst flooding in a century. The landslides in Wayanad district killed thousands just last year. Now they are frantically trying to change their name from India to Bharat, hoping to escape the judgment coming upon nations that participated in the deception. The European nations, who falsely claim to be heirs of biblical civilization while actually being the oppressors, mentioned in Psalms 83, face catastrophic floods, wildfires, and storms at levels never recorded before. France, Germany, and Spain all underwater at various points in the last few years. The so-called Middle East, entirely fabricated to mimic the true biblical geography in America, faces increasing instability as resources deplete and climate patterns shift dramatically. Saudi Arabia's grand vision for the future is crumbling as oil revenue declines and temperatures make the region increasingly uninhabitable. The demographic patterns of these disasters cannot be dismissed as coincidence. The areas hit hardest by these natural disasters are predominantly regions established on misappropriated sacred ground, now facing cosmic realignment through elemental forces. FEMA and other government agencies are completely overwhelmed by the accelerating pattern of disasters. Their computer models fail to predict the precision and intensity of these weather events because they are operating from fundamentally flawed assumptions about what this land actually is. When you overlay biblical geography onto the American landscape, these seemingly random disaster zones reveal themselves as targeted divine judgment falling on specific regions with profound spiritual significance. The Most High is bringing judgment on these nations one by one through these catastrophic events. And for those with spiritual discernment, the message could not be clearer. The age of deception is ending, the era of revelation is beginning, and the true inheritors of this sacred continent are awakening to their divine birthright.
Yeah. Once in a blue moon, they drop a gemstone. The Grand Canyon full of monuments made from red stone. Benedict Arnold wasn't the first to let the feds know the secrets of the U.S. Rome was in the Southwest, and all black America got colonized by conquest. Columbus Army, they left the West in disarray. The Nile River was in Michigan. Back in the day, all the holy rivers dried up, the land that got laid to waste, and the great minds they cultivated got replaced. Hit the history of a mighty kingdom just to save face. The old world is the new world and the proof's in the blueprint. Our story in a museum, misnomered as a student. We in the age of enlightenment, time to start recruiting. If the Lord got a covenant with you, ain't no disputing. These ain't just conspiracies, we ain't in the music. It's not a pyramid scheme, I'm talking Egypt. It's about family and bloodlines when we speaking. This whole world based off of what we do. They called us monkeys, but we're not the ones up in the zoo. It's something that the world already knew, but we just found out, cause it's been hidden from our view since 1492. They were switching out the books, took our likeness and our language, turned us into crooks, stole our land and replaced it with some bush. But we God's people, so the truth is in our roots. Now they putting it on TikTok, but niggas need proof. Niggas talking about they bag up. What a goof, asking what I read, it ain't just one book, it's a few. Some things I can't say, but I know just what to do. Gotta look it up, cause the info been leaked. Now they running out of options, and we starting to see. They the ones up in the movies, we the ones who just lived it. If you don't understand the knowledge, then you probably won't get it. You better get it right now, it ain't much time left. But with God on your side, you ain't got no regrets. You better get it right now, it ain't much time left. But with God on your side, you ain't got no regrets.
The culminating celestial sign marking the beginning of our awakening occurred on September 23, 2017, when a remarkable astronomical alignment perfectly fulfilled the prophecy of Revelation 12, and there appeared a great wonder in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet, and upon her head a crown of 12 stars, and she being with child cried, travailing in birth and pained to be delivered. This alignment was verified by astronomical software and observatory data. On that exact date, the sun was positioned in the constellation Virgo with the moon at her feet. The 9 stars of Leo plus the planets Mercury, Venus, and Mars formed a crown of exactly 12 stars above her head. Jupiter, traditionally known as the king planet in ancient astronomy, was positioned in the womb region of Virgo after undergoing retrograde motion that kept it in this position for 42 weeks. The precise length of human gestation. Astronomical records confirm that similar Virgo alignments with these specific characteristics have occurred during key periods of Israelite liberation and identity restoration. During the Babylonian captivity end period, 539 to 536 BCE, Babylonian astronomical clay tablets from the period document a significant Virgo alignment. The Venus tablet of Amisaduqa, which records astronomical observations from this exact period, shows a similar celestial configuration involving Virgo and Jupiter. This alignment coincided precisely with the Israelites' return from captivity under Cyrus the Great, when they began reclaiming their identity and rebuilding their temple. During the Maccabean revolt culminating in 164 BCE, astronomical records preserved in both the books of Maccabees and confirmed by Greek astronomical observations of the period document notable celestial events in the Virgo constellation. The astronomer Hipparchus, whose work from this exact period has been partially preserved, recorded unusual planetary alignments involving Virgo that coincide with the rededication of the temple and restoration of Israelite worship practices after Antiochus IV had attempted to erase their identity. What makes the 2017 alignment extraordinary is its timing relative to the Great American Eclipse X pattern. The Revelation 12 sign appeared exactly 1 month after the first total solar eclipse crossed America from northwest to southeast on August 21st, 2017. Then, precisely 2,423 days after this sign, the second total eclipse completed the X by crossing from southwest to northeast on April 8th, 2024. The mathematical precision is undeniable. The distance between these celestial events forms a perfect 7-year prophetic timeline, with the Revelation 12 sign positioned at the beginning of this period and the completion of the eclipse X positioned at its end. This heaven-written pattern across America cannot be coincidental. Even more remarkable, when astronomers calculate the path of visibility for the 2017 Revelation 12 sign, they find that the alignment was most perfectly visible from the central United States, the very region marked by the intersection point of the eclipse X. This astronomical fact confirms that America, not the Middle East, was the intended focus of this celestial sign. Throughout biblical history, the woman sign in prophecy has consistently represented Israel during periods of identity awakening after captivity. The 2017 sign, by its position, timing, and mathematical relationship to the eclipse X, identifies America as the location of the true Israelites and heralds their awakening from centuries of identity suppression. The astronomical precision of the Revelation 12 sign marked the beginning of a great awakening among the true biblical Israelites in America, the descendants of those who were already here when European colonizers arrived. These are the people whose identity was systematically erased through slavery, cultural suppression, and historical revision, the very people described in Psalms 83 as the ones against whom the nations conspired. The awakening of Black Americans to their true identity as the indigenous Hebrew people of this continent is the direct fulfillment of biblical prophecy. This is why we are witnessing such intense opposition from the power structures that have maintained the geographical deception for centuries. The Revelation 12 sign marked the cosmic beginning of this awakening, which is now accelerating rapidly as more evidence of our true history and identity comes to light. Just as ancient Israel experienced awakenings and returns from captivity during previous Virgo alignments, we are now experiencing an awakening from centuries of physical and spiritual captivity, a return to our true identity as the covenant people. The woman in Revelation 12 represents us, the true Israelites of America, emerging from the wilderness of identity loss and historical deception. The birth pains described in the prophecy represent the difficult but necessary process of reclaiming our identity despite centuries of systematic erasure. The child being born represents the emerging consciousness of our true heritage and purpose. And just as the prophecy warns that a great dragon would try to devour this child, we see the desperate attempts of the power structure to suppress this awakening through continued deception, distraction, and division. The 10 plagues described in the Apocalypse of Abraham are not merely punishments. They are signs of this great transition as the true Israelites awaken to their identity, while judgment falls upon the nations that conspired against them. This period of awakening and judgment was precisely timed to follow the Revelation 12 sign, which serves as the cosmic announcement that the era of deception is ending and the true inheritors of the covenant are reclaiming their divine birthright. Just as the celestial sign appeared above the true biblical lands of America, the judgments are now falling on these same territories and on the nations complicit in the great deception. The convergence of these astronomical, geological, and meteorological events cannot be coincidental. They are the divine timeline unfolding exactly as prophesied as we awaken to who we truly are. The judgment isn't falling randomly either. Look at who's being hit the hardest. The January 2025 Los Angeles fires, they devastated Pacific Palisades, where the median home price is $3.8 million. Burned out all those celebrity mansions and luxury homes built on land stolen from our ancestors. Hurricane Helene in September 2024, it slammed into Asheville, North Carolina, a city that's 84% white and only 11% black. A city with a dark history of racial violence. Our brothers John Humphrey, Bob Brackett, and Hezekiah Rankin were lynched there, their stories almost lost to time. The March 2025 New Madrid earthquake, it hit hardest in West Tennessee, where some of the worst atrocities against our people occurred during slavery. It's almost like the Most High has a GPS system for these disasters, targeting the exact communities that have built their wealth on oppression, that have separated themselves from us, that have ground the faces of the poor. Oh, but the mainstream media won't tell you any of this. They'll talk about tragic coincidences and random acts of nature. They'll interview those crying white ladies who lost their vacation homes and expect us to feel bad. Meanwhile, our people have been suffering for centuries and nobody shed a tear. The Apocalypse of Abraham tells us in chapter 30 that these plagues come at the passing over of the 12th hour of the earth, meaning at the very end of this current age, just before the dawning of the age of righteousness. We're witnessing the final hours of this age of ungodliness as these plagues intensify and accelerate. The 7-year period between the 2017 and 2024 eclipses marks the beginning of this intensified judgment. But this judgment isn't the end. It's the beginning of restoration. Just as the plagues in Egypt led to the liberation of the Israelites, these judgments are paving the way for the restoration of the original people to their rightful inheritance. The Apocalypse of Abraham gives us this promise in chapter 29, "And then shall righteous men of thy seed survive in the number which is kept secret by me, hastening in the glory of my name to the place prepared beforehand for them. And they shall live and be established through sacrifices and gifts of righteousness and truth in the age of the righteous, and shall rejoice in me continually." And it continues. "And they shall destroy those who have destroyed them, and shall insult those who have insulted them, and of those who defame them they shall spit in the face, scorned by me, while they, the righteous, shall behold me full of joy, rejoicing with my people, and receiving those who return to me." The tables are turning, family. The judgment that has begun on the house of the oppressor will lead to the restoration of the oppressed. The truth that has been buried is being uncovered. The identity that was stolen is being reclaimed. So, what does this mean for us, the remnant who are awakening to these truths? Our first calling is to recognize our true identity as the seed of Abraham, the original inhabitants of this land. We must reclaim the knowledge of who we are, shaking off the false identities that have been imposed upon us. Second, we must return to the laws and commandments of the Most High, not the corrupted religion given to us by our oppressors, but the true law and covenant made with our ancestors. Third, we must separate ourselves from the corrupt systems of this world. As these plagues intensify, we need to be prepared spiritually, mentally, and physically. We must create our own communities, support systems, and infrastructure to weather these judgments. Finally, we must be witnesses to the truth. We are called to proclaim who we are and whose we are, to declare the truth about our identity, about this land, and about the judgments that are now falling. As we witness these plagues continuing to unfold across America in 2025, remember that none of this is random. The Most High warned us thousands of years ago about what would happen in these last days. The eclipse is marking an X over America. The sign in the heavens of Revelation 12, the 10 plagues manifesting one by one, the awakening of the remnant to their true identity, these are all signs that the age of the righteous is drawing near. So as these signs continue to manifest, stay vigilant, stay prepared, and above all, stay connected to the truth. The system has spent centuries burying this knowledge, erasing our identity and hiding our inheritance, but the truth cannot remain buried forever. The judgment is just beginning, but redemption is on the horizon. Just as Egypt's plagues led to liberation, these judgments are paving the way for the restoration of the original people to their rightful place. The truth will prevail. The divine pattern will be fulfilled. The Most High keeps his promises. Peace and wisdom to you all.